Time now for our longer feature, and to make that introduction, please welcome our great member, Paul Sussman. Paul?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you all to join me in helping welcome to the podium a man fully committed to an unalienable right, our pursuit of happiness, Dr. David Johnson.
Thank you very much. Isn't it a beautiful day to be inside? I better be good. I told Paul I could do this as a French opera if it would make it more interesting, but he said no. We are all leaders in this room, and leaders want their organizations to be healthy places, including psychologically helpful. We're community leaders in this room as well, and we have an investment in having communities that are psychologically healthy. And my good news for you today, one of my messages for you today, is that we know better than we have ever known in the past how to make a profound difference for many, many different mental illnesses. We have a wide array of evidence-based best practices. My field has a history of doing really strange things, but these days we do scientifically proven things, and we can make specific differences in a variety of fields, and I so appreciate the story that we've heard about the difference that we can make in that one area as well. 1 in 4 adults in any given year has a diagnosable mental health condition that could benefit from treatment. If you haven't had your mental illness yet, don't be smug. Many people don't have a mental illness until older adulthood, when there are so many reasons to provoke and exacerbate underlying predisposition. 1 in 5 children show emerging signs of emotional problems that will need to be addressed at some times. 1 in 3 families have a mentally ill family member, a seriously mentally ill family member. If your family doesn't have one, I have got you covered. We have more than our share in my family. How a culture and a time deals with mental illness is based on what they understand about mental illness. In the thousands of years of humankind history of taking care of problems, at times when it was thought that mental illness was the result of a possession by an evil spirit, it made total sense to cut a hole in the top of the head so the evil spirit could get out. At a time when mental illness was seen as some kind of moral lapse, then lots of spiritual reading and spiritual guidance made sense. When mental illness was seen as lazy, then forced labor makes sense. In very discouraged times when we didn't know what to do about mental illness, I guess it made sense at the time to shackle people to walls where they would live in institutions for decades and perhaps die, and as is true of the history of Western State Hospital, be buried outside with just a number rather than a name out of some very perverse adherence to confidentiality. By the beginning of the 20th century, some saw mental illness as a result of sexual repression, and it seemed to make sense to free associate for hours in front of a silent psychoanalyst. Later on in the 20th century, we began to think that families were the problems. When I was in graduate school in the early 70s, I was taught the term schizophrenogenic mother. Such a bad mom, she gives rise to schizophrenia. By the last quarter of the 20th century, families like mine banded together and said, we are the primary caregivers. We are not the causes of mental illness. And there's a growing body of evidence that shows, number one, that the brain is an organ and is part of the body. And secondly, that there are differences that we could now see in the structure and in what was happening in the tiniest synapse that showed that people were born differently. We now are finding genetic markers and clusters of genetic markers that explain predisposition for schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and so on. We all have psychiatric symptoms. That's part of being human. Any of us who have lost a loved one know the despair, the deep sadness that we feel, the anguish, the anger, the rage, the sense of hopelessness for the future. These are human emotions. We don't all get diagnosed as clinically depressed. That's part of what happens. Think back to when you were college and pulled an all-nighter Perhaps you were working on a term paper at 3 in the morning, but you might have seen something flicker out of the corner of your eyes, or you might have, that wasn't really there, or you might have heard music in the background that wasn't really there when you were just getting a little exhausted and loopy. You were not diagnosed as having schizophrenia because of that. Think of the great elation you have felt when you've won an important contract, and just the despondency you feel when your business loses a very important client. Well, elation and despondency, these can be symptoms of bipolar disorder, but we're not all diagnosed with that. Think of the times in your workplace where you have a sense that something's going on behind your back, and there are people who are out to get you. Now, every time I've thought that, it's been true, but for most of us, that's not the case. But we don't get diagnosed as having psychotic, paranoid thoughts. The word psychosis is so much less frightening than it sounds. All psychotic means is other than reality. If you have a hunger for accolades, if you want your successes known far and wide, you're not automatically diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder. So there isn't really a them and us in the world of who has psychiatric symptoms and who doesn't. As a society, we kind of agree what that band of normal is. And when people go outside that band of normal, we can wonder what's going on. Is there something that we can do to help? And that's when we begin to look for a diagnosis and a matching treatment. I'll tell you, a diagnosis is never helpful if it doesn't tell you what to do about it. It can only wound and stigmatize if we don't have things to do. And that's why today is such a great time, because we do have things to do. Life is filled with stressors, and life is filled with resilience. Every day, you won't believe it, but I start out the morning in the gym working out on Nautilus machines. I stress my body, I wear down muscle fiber, and I'm resilient, and my body becomes stronger because of it. Periodically in life, we have trauma that comes our way, and trauma requires something much bigger than resilience. It requires recovery. And the astonishing thing about people is, for the most part, most of the time, we do recover. Imagine what would happen if when a child turns 16, we hand that person the program, the menu of the traumas that lay ahead in life. We know that lots of good stuff lays ahead in life. Life has times of joy and accomplishment and closeness and love, but life also holds trauma. And at 16, if you were to read, well, you're going to flunk out of your second year of college, and then there will be an assault before your first marriage, which will end in divorce. And then in your second marriage, you lose a child very early on to death. Later on, there will be the cancer that may entail an amputation. And then there's bankruptcy that's up ahead for you later. In retirement, your loved one will die, and you will be lonely, and you'll be living with much less money than you ever thought you were going to. And in the end, you will have either a fatal accident or a mortal illness, and you will die. I mean, how many people would say, I won the lottery, I want to live that life, you know? But those of us who have been around know that lives entail that. All of us have our story, and all of us have the collection of traumas that we have had to be resilient to. And so what people do is that genetic predisposition we have and those learned behaviors that we've gathered along the way create the toolbox with which we withstand trauma. And when the trauma is too much, our underlying vulnerabilities can emerge. And people who are predisposed for major mental illnesses, those can emerge at times of great stress. Those of us who aren't having those vulnerabilities, we've got other ones to be sure, other problems happen for us. Children are absolutely brilliant. Children are so brilliant, I'm just astonished. Do you know that an infant born to two deaf parents, by the time that infant is 3 weeks old, has figured out that making noise isn't going to get you anything in terms of signaling distress. And by 3 weeks old, the infant has figured out that to turn different color, to make much more emphatic facial expressions, to move more violently is the way to get help. If they figure that out by 3, think about what we figured out by the age of 18. We spend our childhood gathering information and defining for ourselves what the world is like. And we spend our adulthood living in such a way as to prove that our map of the world is correct. When we have gathered correct information and developed correct coping mechanisms, that can be tremendously helpful. But think what happens to the child who lives in the home where an alcoholic parent beats them, or the child who lives in a home where they are sexually molested, or the child that lives in such great poverty that basic things they need aren't available, and any number of other things. That person goes into adulthood having developed coping mechanisms to get through that childhood. They may have learned, keep your head low, otherwise you're going to get hit. Don't talk directly to somebody, don't be assertive or express needs, because that may bring trouble. So they learn to triangulate in conversation. They certainly don't spend time figuring out who they are, what they need, what they want, what their gifts are, because they're having to defend against the onslaught that comes their way. That person then takes into their first job, their first relationship, parenting their first child, a map of the world that doesn't make sense, though it was brilliant for getting through that very eccentric home. And so we can learn good behaviors, we can learn behaviors that are difficult. The whole process of psychotherapy is simply helping people re-understand what happened to them, reinterpret what it means, and having a new map for the future that doesn't overgeneralize information that's not helpful. We all have our tipping point, and we need to be humble in remembering that. I think of the valiant men and women who we have sent off to our 2 wars in the past decade. And we know what happens after the first and second and third and fourth deployments. At some point, we see dramatic increases in depression, in anxiety, and eventually in suicidal impulses. We have that haunting statistic where more people died of suicide in the military last year than died in Iraq. These people didn't have bad moms. These people aren't morally lazy or possessed by spirits. These people have experienced more trauma than they, between their genetic toolbox and their coping mechanisms, could manage. And it can happen to any of us. In my career, I've been just fascinated by resiliency. I've been in this business for 34 years in King County, and I am more inspired by how resilient people are than I am intrigued by all the ways we can think pathologically about mental health problems. I think of Haiti, for instance. I mean, look at the past year. Entire communities have been traumatized. Earthquake, economic meltdown, a mine that implodes, terrorist acts. Think of Haiti, where everybody in Port-au-Prince learned that in the blink of an eye, you can lose your home, your child, your parent, your job, and your sense of safety in the future. These aren't psychotic thoughts. This really happened to those people. And yet, we see signs now that town and that country are rebuilding themselves. I think back to the video of that boy who had been buried for, 14 days, the 7-year-old. And I think we as a species are fascinated by resilience. And think of the video when they brought that boy out of that little tiny place where he had been stuck for so many days. And his arms lifted up and his face lifted up, and he had this radiant smile as he looked around in wonder at life and people and that he was back again. That was inspiring, but we know that radiant smile is not how that boy will look for the rest of his life. We know that he has experienced a significant trauma, and he will need help re-understanding, rebuilding a sense of safety in the future. This is why Michelle Obama was visiting an art therapy program yesterday in Haiti. Believe me, anybody who's in Port-au-Prince is going to have a hard time in their life to come sitting in the middle seat in an airplane or being in a space that they can't be sure they can quickly get out of. The legacy of trauma goes on forever. Think of the young woman who is in high school and her father dies. There's the trauma of that death, but there's all the trauma that follows, like a tapestry whose threads are not quite the same. When she graduates from high school, he's not there. When she gets married, he's not there. When she has her first child, he's not there. Trauma is part of life, and trauma is something that we all need to overcome. You're going to be hearing a lot in coming years and months about the term trauma-informed care, trauma-sensitive schools, trauma-sensitive workplaces. And What that tells us is we need to keep in mind that when we see problem behaviors with our staff, when we see loved ones suddenly acting very different and strangely, when we see behaviors that aren't linked to the life events around them, we should assume that there's a great possibility, not a certainty, but a great possibility that there is some trauma that happened along the way that is manifesting itself in how those people are behaving now. We each have our own story. I have my own story of trauma and resiliency and recovery, and you have yours. Think back on the traumas in your life, and then think about how they'll show in the here and now. Under stress, we all regress. When the deadlines get too heavy, when you're worrying about the bottom line, when your children are going through a transition that's frightening, stress can accumulate, and there are those days when we don't operate as our best selves. There are days when we snap or when we worry. This is the manifestation of whatever it is we learned at whatever point from a difficult trauma. So that's the menu that many of us deal with. Think about the people who are born with genetic predispositions for a schizophrenia or a bipolar or a major depression. One of the reasons that we first see mental illnesses surface around 18 to 21 is that's a time in life when we put young people through tremendous stress. Partly, their neurochemistry has grown to a point where these symptoms can occur, but we're also saying to people, go out, be on your own, live on your own, you're going to have to make it. How many stories do you know of the class president who goes off for her freshman year at Stanford and by December is in a psychiatric hospital? But even there's room for hope. I often have friends and colleagues call me to tell me that, my nephew's just been diagnosed with schizophrenia, or my daughter has been given a bipolar diagnosis, or my sister is now telling me that she has a borderline personality. And to each of those people who are calling me out of tremendous worry that the future is gone, I say to them, this is good news, because we know what to do about those things. My colleagues in the room who have been in our business of mental health for years remember what it was like when a borderline personality disorder was one of the most awful things we could hear, because these were people who were trapped in anguish-filled interactions with others and repelled others with their behaviors. We now have an evidence-based best practice, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is tremendously effective in helping turn people's lives around to the point where they are some of the most fun and creative people that I know and that I work with. We have exquisite medications that can make a significant difference for people when those are appropriate. And there are more medications in the pipeline that have better and better effect with less and less side effects. And we have a great number of evidence-based practices. My organization is involved right now in helping develop the 14th evidence-based best practice. We hope that will be approved by the federal government. So new answers are happening all the time. Leadership, what is leadership? We see a challenge or we see a problem. We figure out what's causing that. We help people envision an answer to that problem or envision a new product. And we marshal all the resources we can. We set goals. We have strategies to achieve those goals. And we get people to join us in making a new thing happen that hadn't happened before. Psychotherapy is very much the same way. In psychotherapy, we help an individual who may be despondent, may be psychotic, may be suicidal. We help them imagine that indeed there can be a future that's a good future and a rewarding future. And then we marshal whatever resources we have. We find the diagnosis that tells us which of a variety of treatments can make a difference. And we employ those, and there is recovery. For some people, psychotherapy is the thing to do. Psychotherapy is an insight-oriented treatment where we help people reintegrate what's happened. Other people, knowing the cause of how they think the way they think or why they feel the way they feel, isn't going to be very effective. But for them, we can do cognitive behavioral therapy, where we ask people to just practice some new thoughts and practice some new behaviors. And we build in a chain on that until people are living in the world very differently and experiencing life differently. For some people, we find that teaching relaxation and stress management can have tremendous effect. For many people, we do a combination of these. For some people, we find that simply educating them about their illness and about treatment options makes a difference. For some people, we find that making sure that there's housing, making sure that they have a way to get a job and keep a job, making sure that there's a way to keep track of their money so they can make it to the end of the month and still have food. There's a variety of different things that we can do and that work. We know that prevention, for every dollar we spend on prevention now, we save $7 down the line. And we also know that for 80% of people who enter mental health treatment at this time, they get better. Their lives get better. The Community Health Plan of Washington partnered with my organization and a few other organizations in the past 3 years to look at what would happen if you were to give a mental health benefit to people who didn't have one, who had other insurance, not fancy insurance, but what would happen to their overall medical costs. And the jury is in, the data is there. When we help take care of the psychological challenges that people have, the entire cost of medical care is reduced, including surgery, including other kinds of inpatient care. So we know what to do more than we ever have before, and we know that it makes a difference. You all are leaders, and you know this, and you've been doing this, and I encourage you to continue whatever you're doing and to push yourself to do more to make sure that your workplace is a workplace that's focused on wellness in every possible way. My friend from Kibble and Prentice, Clark Dafford, has made sure that I get this message and that I instill it in my own workplace. The wellness-oriented workplace is also a workplace that's going to be flexible for people who have mental illnesses. How is it that you can benefit from the great gifts that these people have and also have the flexibility so that in their better times they can be stars, and in their more challenged times you can help them have whatever supports they need to get through? Wellness happens in many different ways. At NAVOS, we have a psychiatric hospital. We have a 72-bed hospital where everybody who comes in is involuntarily committed. Everybody who comes through that door is stretched out and strapped to a gurney, having the worst day of their life. And the reason that they get deemed to be involuntarily committable is that we have proof that within 24 hours they are likely to kill themselves or to kill others, or are so gravely disabled they're not going to make it. And you have to ask yourself, is this the day to quit smoking? Well, we've decided it is. And so at NAVOS, our inpatient hospital is a tobacco-free facility for our clients as well as our staff. And it has gone very well. Some people quit smoking forever after their 16-day stay with us. Some people just have the experience of an oasis of time of where it's worked. People get better. People do recover all the time. I think of the story of Jerry. Jerry is a woman who was a microbiologist at a hospital here in town. Very successful, a couple decades there, and she went on to become a manager of a women's health clinic. At midlife, Jerry had her first bout of her bipolar disorder. And within a year, she lost her job, lost her car, lost her house, lost most of her friends by the way she was behaving, lost her sense of hope for the future, lost her sense of confidence and her sanity. And when Jerry got to us, it took a couple of years to find the right medication regimen that could contain many of the psychiatric symptoms. And it took that many years in psychotherapy and education for her to begin to have a sense of optimism for the future. I have a doctorate. I've taught in graduate schools. I know that education is one path to wisdom, but I think that the life experience of living with a mental health disorder is like having a PhD, and I highly, highly respect that path to wisdom. So we started a 70-hour training program, followed by a 100-hour internship, and we helped the state develop a certification exam so that people like Jerry, no matter how symptomatic they were, could become certified peer support specialists. And today, Jerry works with me full-time as my colleague on the treatment team. She's fully salaried. She is off public assistance. She is a taxpayer, which she tells me about all the time. And that doesn't mean her symptoms are gone. Recovery doesn't mean that symptoms are gone. Recovery just means that we can surmount challenges and life can become much better. I have a feeling my time is over. So I would ask that you take these ideas and you spread them with your friends and family and coworkers, the good news about what's up ahead now. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. If our mic folks could get out and about.
This is one of our most esteemed colleagues. Yes. The microphone will recover, and we will be happy.
Thank you for such a fascinating and informative talk.
Thank you.
And I find what's going on in brain research today by neurologists and scientists to be also so fascinating. I have the impression in the past that psychologists, psychiatrists, and the other side have not seen much benefit in working together.
Yes.
But maybe that is changing. Could you tell me more about that?
Yes. The tremendously self-indulgent world of the therapist who thinks that whatever they're intuitively feeling or thinking is the path to wisdom, hopefully those eras are gone. There is good value in compassion and intuition, but these are illnesses, and there are definitely treatment regimens that are based on looking at the neurology of all of this. We're at the point now where we're realizing that people who develop personality or character disorders also have genetic markers for a predisposition. So if the problems have a physiological component, we need to intervene in a physiological way. And I think more and more that's happening. And one of the components of healthcare reform is that even organizations that treat mental illnesses are going to be reimbursed for outcomes, not just for time spent with patients. And so I think we're going to see much more adherence to evidence-based best practices. And the scientists are bringing us that. Thank you.
A question over here.
I'm curious, over the last 2 years with the different economy issues that we've had, and we've had a lot of people laid off, if there is a survivor workplace trauma that is impacting the occurrence of people experiencing things that they may have experienced at a later time, and how are people's emotional state, as you know, if they are the people that either were laid off or the people that weren't laid off but have been dealing with the survivor issues?
That's a great question. And yes, nothing is more traumatizing than thinking that you're going to lose your home, your job, and not be able to take care of your family. And again, based on what people's life experiences have been in the past, they manage that stress in different ways. And we see some people who are able to rise above and be resourceful, and other people who drift into Great Depression. One thing I want to mention is that after 9/11, I put together a special set of groups to take care of our very mentally ill patients, thinking that after a trauma like that, they would be specially impacted. And in fact, they ended up being the support people for their non-mentally ill family members. And we found that that would be for two reasons. Partly, there's evidence in the literature that trauma stimulates chemicals that are sometimes very helpful at the synapse for mentally ill people. But secondly, mentally ill people have spent their lives dealing with despair, worry, trauma, anxiety. They had a bag of tricks that their family members didn't have, and they were able to share them.
Time for one more.
I see a hand there, and I think it landed here. Okay.
You've talked about the individual, and a lot of our neuroses are collective neuroses. Is there a development of the science of what healthy group behaviors are, or how to become more resilient in organizations?
Yes, there can be a collective decision that things are good or things are bad or things despairing, things that are not. There are many ways where whether it's through a sexist culture or whatever, that we create a label and we create a pathology that doesn't necessarily have to be there. I think one of the most inspiring things that we got from one of our speakers earlier today is that people who take their life experience and cultures who look at life experiences and say, I'm going to turn this into a strength and I'm going to thrive because of it, rather than diminish because of it, are a sign of that. And so I guess I would take, for instance, the whole group of families of the mentally ill who for centuries were told that not only did they have symptomatic people, that they themselves were evil, bad-making people. And when they collectively decided to not cooperate with that paradigm, we saw great progress in the treatment of the mentally ill. We are out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Those suffering from mental illness don't get the mainstream attention they deserve, so thank you for your dedication to change that. Thanks again to all of today's program participants. Next week, April 21st, we're just going to be a skip and a jump away down at the Westin Hotel. Roy, what are we going to hear about? Excellent. Roy's on the job once again. You know, I kind of got a kick last week out of reading some of author Regina Brett's 50 Life Lessons. So if you don't mind, I'll read a few more. Here goes. You don't have to win every argument. It's okay to agree to disagree. When it comes to chocolate, resistance is futile. It's okay to let your children see you cry. If a relationship has to be a secret, you shouldn't be in it. When it comes to going after what you love in life, don't take no for an answer. And finally, Ralph, I don't know if you're here, but be eccentric now. Don't wait for old age to wear plaid. Thanks for being here today. Love life no matter what. We're adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.